Hey guys, my name is Bahroz. I am a career coach and welcome to my channel. In this video, I will share with you the exact questions that you can expect to be asked in an Amazon interview, and hence it's must that you prepare for all these questions. I will not only share with you the questions, but will also explain as to how you can go about answering them in a way that you ace the entire interview. The reason I have come on this subject is because I have coached numerous candidates who have successfully landed a job at Amazon, most of who share back with me the details of hiring process, including the questions they were asked in the interview. By the way, in case you are interested in getting a one-to-one live coaching on interview skills from me, you can book a session with me using the link in the description of this video. In case you're curious as to what do I cover in these sessions, you can check out some of the recorded coaching sessions that are available on my channel within the Amazon hiring playlist. Now going back to Amazon, note that Amazon has 16 leadership principles, and as part of their hiring process, including the interview, they are qualifying you on basis of those leadership principles. I have made a separate video on Amazon leadership principles where I explain what are Amazon leadership principles and what do they mean. So I highly recommend you check them out before you even start doing your preparation or as part of your overall interview preparation. However, in an interview, they would not be asking you questions pertaining to all the 16 leadership principles. Rather, they will only qualify you on the leadership principles that are most relevant for the role. At best, 6 to 8. For this, I've made a separate video where I explain how you can go about finding which leadership principles are most relevant for the role that you are applying for. I will leave the link to that video here or in the description of this video. The exact interview questions that I will share in this video pertain to the leadership principle bias for action. I will make a separate video or make separate videos for each of the 16 leadership principles. What you need to do is go through the playlist on my channel for Amazon hiring process and check out the videos for the leadership principles that are most relevant for the role that you are applying for. Note, the reason I use the word exact questions is because at Amazon, the interviewers follow a standard interviewing template. Whenever there is an interview, the interviewer is provided with a booklet by HR that has a set of questions to be used as a guideline. However, since most of the interviewers are lazy, they end up asking exactly the same questions as they are written in the guideline. So for someone like me who coaches and talks to numerous candidates on daily basis, it's possible to know exactly what are the standard Amazon interview questions. Now, before we go into the questions and explanations on how to ace them, I have an important task of you, which is in case you find any value from this video, do me a favor. Please press the like button as this keeps me motivated and helps me improve the quality and quantity of content that I post on this channel. Secondly, subscribe to the channel as well, because on this channel I post content pertaining to how you can achieve career success and how you can achieve personal finance success, become wealthy. In case these topics are of interest to you, make sure you subscribe to the channel because this channel is right for you. Now note, these are behavioral interview questions that they will be asking you in an Amazon interview. And I have here 8 questions to share with you, 8 behavioral questions, all of which are getting to the same point. That is to gauge or qualify you on leadership principles like bias for action. So they're qualifying you on leadership principle, bias for action. On tips to ace behavioral interview questions, I have a separate video which I recommend you check out as well, where I explain how you can go about answering and acing behavioral interview questions. Now let's get rolling into the sample questions and how you can ace them. So the first example I have here is, give me an example of a calculated risk that you have taken where speed was critical. What was the situation and how did you handle it? What steps did you take to mitigate the risk? What was the outcome? Knowing what you know now, would you have done anything differently? So here what the question is asking us is if there is an example of taking a calculated risk but speed was critical. Again, because the leadership principle is all about bias for action, so you have to find an example where you took a calculated risk and had to come up with an action plan or took an action with speed. So here whatever example you come up with is talk about, in that particular example, how did you first go about defining the goals clearly? So you exactly know what is that needs to get delivered, because there could be a lot of objectives, a lot of agendas on the table. But once you have the goal written down, everyone is aligned to the goal, everyone is focused and everyone is looking in one direction. it becomes very easy to exactly know this is what we need to deliver and the rest everything is noise. So this is one way of taking a speedy decision where you are also very calculated, which is to define what the goal is, what the objectives are. Second is you establish your risk tolerance, like how much risk can you take? Is it about $5,000? Is it about $5 million? It's a very different risk tolerance, right? So, and also depending on the size, depending on the different conditions. So you establish what your risk tolerance is. What is the kind of risk you are okay to take? If you've established your goals, if you've established what your risk tolerance is, it becomes very easy for you to know exactly what is the kind of decision you can take, what are the decisions you cannot take. So you are kind of doing that calculated risk part here by defining your goals, by doing an assessment of the risk tolerance. Third is you talk about how you simulate the worst and the best case scenario. So you know what is the range of the risk, what is the worst that can happen, what is the best that can happen. And then in that range, you can take the decision. So even if you cannot go about doing the analysis paralysis to exactly know what the outcome would be, as long as you have a range, you can still work with it, because you know if at best this is the outcome I'll get, at worst this is the outcome I'll get. Is this within my risk tolerance? Yes, it is. Then I'm good. Is it delivering the goal that I have? Yes, it is. Then I'm good. Next is you talk about how did you go about breaking down the decision into key assumptions, like what were the key critical assumptions which were really important to make the decisions, and what were the irrelevant or less relevant assumptions. Are those key assumptions the right assumptions? Are they properly vetted or not? So instead of vetting all the assumptions, you just go about vetting those key assumptions. So for instance, if there is an assumption on what will be the market growth, and let's say that assumption is between, it can be 1%, 2% or negative 1%. Maybe it's not a huge delta. But what is the impact of changing the price? Maybe that's 4 to 5% or 8% or whatever, a significantly higher number. So now that assumption becomes a critical assumption, because if the market growth is not exactly 2 and it's 1, it's fine. But if the pricing impact is not 8 and ends up being 2, then it will change the ball game. So you kind of figure out what are the key assumptions that are most critical. Then you leverage based on past experience, which is, again, you don't have a lot of data, you have to take the decision quickly. So you make use of past experience, which is, has this been done before? Have we done something similar before? What did we learn and how can we learn from it and apply in this particular situation? Another thing that you can do when, or talk about, which you've done where you've taken calculated risk, is doing test pilot or doing an MVP, which is a minimal viable product. So instead of launching on full scale, you do a small test and you learn and decide whether it's working or not. So that way you kind of are speed to market. You have the speed to market as well. You are also testing, and you are taking a calculated risk by going with testing and piloting the situation or the action plan. Another thing that you might want to talk about, or it's important to talk about, is how did you go about maintaining healthy communication between the experts, between your manager, between all the key stakeholders. So everyone is involved. It's not just you taking the decision, you have everyone involved. And that's how you become calculated as well in terms of taking the risk, because now everyone is involved, anyone can contribute, everyone can contribute, and hence the risk is less and less. Lastly, set or talk about how did you go about setting clear milestones and were ready to pivot when needed, which is allowing yourself to change if the change needs to be done. So it's a calculated action that you're taking it with speed, but also giving yourself room for maneuverability. So how did you have those milestones baked in, saying, okay, once we deliver this milestone, we know, are we on track or not? Is it successful or not? If it wasn't successful in this particular milestone, we pivot or we cancel altogether. So having those milestones exactly to know when to pivot or not, that would be another good thing to talk about in your example. Now, one important call out, as part of Amazon hiring process, you may also have to sit for an Amazon assessment test. The best way to ace that test is to learn the hacks, for which I have made separate videos, but more importantly, to practice sample questions and sample tests. For this purpose, I sifted through the web and found this amazing one website that has sample practice questions and tests that mimics the original test. I highly recommend you check them out as part of your preparation to get hired at Amazon. Second example question that I have here is, tell me about a time when you worked against tight deadlines and didn't have time to consider all options before making a decision. How much time did you have? What approach did you take? What did you learn from the situation? Again, as I said, all the questions that you will be asked are trying to understand how strong of a bias do you have for action. So here it's a tight deadline. You don't have time to consider all options before making a decision. How do you go about it? First, start with the core objective. So you exactly know what you want to deliver. So always talk about your example and say, in that particular example, first thing I did was to understand what was the core objective and lay it down, agree, align it with all the key stakeholders so everyone agrees to it, that this is the key objective you want to deliver, and this is the most primary or important thing or most critical thing that we have to deliver. Number two is to set priority for different options you have, because here you don't have time to consider all the options. But what you can do is you can list down the options in list of priority and say, okay, these are the top priority options and we will only focus on them and ignore the ones which are less priority. And that way you can consider the top two options. Let's say you have 10 options, you don't have time to assess 10 options, but you have time to assess 2 options. So how about you list the options in terms of priority and only assess the 2 and try them out and see which one is the best. Also make use of available information that you have. You don't need to be a perfectionist here. Whatever information is available with you, whatever data is available with you, which is good enough, you can make use of that instead of going and seeking more information and new information. Whatever past information you have, you can kind of use that. So was there a situation where you made use of already available information? Another thing that you can talk about is how did you go about delegating the task, just because you don't have enough time. But what you can do is you can put more bodies to it. So you can delegate some of the tasks where you're not an expert, where you think someone else is an expert, and you can delegate that part, even if that means seeking help from your manager and asking them to assign someone to the project. Then you can talk about how you made use of simple frameworks like doing a pros and cons analysis or a best or worst case analysis. So for the key options that you've prioritized, you ended up prioritizing, you do a pro and con analysis, or you do a best and worst case analysis for each one of them, just to have the understanding of your risk tolerance, and then to know which one is better, which one is, what are the pros, what are the cons of each, so you can take a kind of a calculated decision even with limited time that you have. And lastly, you can talk about how did you go about breaking down the task and focusing on the task or the part of the task which are most important in that particular project, and the ones that are less critical, less important, so focusing less on them. This way you kind of allocate your resources and your time to the most important tasks first, most critical tasks in that entire project, and not to spread thin yourself or your time equally across all the subtasks. You exactly decide what are the important tasks in the project, which are the less priority tasks, and then focus on the ones which are most important. The third question I have here is describe a situation where you made an important business decision without consulting your manager. What was the situation and how did you turn out in that situation? Would you have done anything differently? Here, as I said before, this is like core. You first go by clarifying the objective, and do the objective align with the objectives of the company or objectives of the project or the department that you're working on. Then you go about also making sure that the project that you're working on is in scope with what has been previously aligned. So the idea here is you say, even if your manager is not there, as long as you have the alignment from your manager in terms of what are the objectives, what is the scope, you just need to work within that scope, for those objectives, to focus on those objectives, and your manager should be good, because these things are already aligned or pre-aligned and have been clarified with your manager previously. So you make sure you understand what the objective is, that is already penciled down. And then this particular project, will that deliver on the objective or not? Will it be within the scope or not? If it is, then that means you really don't need to worry about consulting your manager. You just need to make sure that you deliver on those objectives. Second is you want to talk about is assessing the risk and consequences. Like, can you manage the risk? Is again similar to risk tolerance. What is the risk? What is the maximum or worst that can happen? And is that something that you can manage, you can answer or respond to if that particular risks materializes or not? Third, you might want to talk about is how you relied on established guidelines and past decisions. So you can always go to your manager later and say, what I did was based on precedents, or was based on the guidelines which were already penciled down, which were already aligned. So look for those angles if there were any of those sort in your example. Then talk about how you prioritized organizational goals, as I said before, which is at the end of the day, you were delivering on the goals of the organization, of the department. So as long as you're doing that, your manager would be okay. Set a backup plan. Did you set up a backup plan in case this doesn't work out? Is this decision reversible? Is there a backup plan for this decision if something goes back? So assessing the risk tolerance and then saying, okay, this was the risk I was taking, and there was a way to mitigate the risk, and if that risk materializes, there is a way for a backup plan, so we can kind of reverse the decision or hence allow for the risk to not impact us. Then you might want to talk about how did you go about documenting that decision and the rationale behind it, because you don't have time to consult your manager, but what you did was you made sure that you document what are you doing and why are you doing and what will it achieve. So when your manager is available, they know that there is a certain rationale you made use of and it wasn't just out of the blue. You went through a detailed logic of why did you make that decision. And then you might want to talk about how did you go about seeking expert opinion. So it wasn't just you doing it alone, rather you were seeking opinion from other experts as well and involving the other stakeholders. So your decision is not just your decision, rather you had a collective decision or you had input from others as well. So it was an informed decision. Now the next question I have here to share is, tell me about a time when you had to gather information and respond immediately to a situation. What was the outcome? Would you have done anything differently? So the idea is, how do you go about quickly gathering information and deciding immediately based on whatever information you have? Again, you start with the objective. If the objective is very clear, you know what you're delivering, you know what you're talking about, you know what your end result is. It becomes very easy for you to take a calculated decision or make an immediate decision, because amongst all the options that are available, which one is the one that delivers on the core objectives? Then talk about how did you go about gathering the information, like what were the sources? So prioritize the sources. Which are the ones which are important or good sources, which are the ones which are weak sources, and focus on the ones which are most important or the strong sources. So you can kind of make use of whatever information that you have, that you've gathered, and decide quickly, as against being just bogged down in the entire information that you have. You make use of your network, which is again involving others as well, involving the experts and seeking their opinion in terms of the information that you have, that which one is a quality information and how do you go about making the decision. You have a collective decision. Another thing that you can make use of or talk about is how did you make use of technology to gather the information and sort the information rapidly. How did you make use of AI to sort through what was the most relevant information and then apply it. Another thing that you would want to talk about is how did you make use of the framework like 80-20 rule. So what were the assumptions, was the information which would have impacted 80% of the outcome of the decision. So only focus on that, as against just trying to focus on every single piece of information. Talk about how did you go about summarizing the findings clearly and communicating them so others are also aware of it, as well as against you just making the decision on that information. So making it a summary of it, being very clear with it and communicating it with others. And then maybe talk about how did you take actions and prepare to adjust, like be open for tweaking. So if something was wrong, how you were able to adjust and implement any tweaks in your plan. Like as I talked before as well, you have different milestones, and as a milestone passes by, you kind of see, okay, this milestone has crossed, these are the issues, this is how I will tweak the plan. The next sample question that I have is, give me an example of when you had to make an important decision and had to decide between moving forward or gathering more information. What did you do? What was the outcome? What information is necessary for you to have before acting? So you're kind of making a decision and you're deciding, do you need to gather more information or not? Here, again, think of example from your past where you evaluated the decision's urgency, like how urgent is the decision. Basis that you can decide how much extra information do you need. Does it have to be delivered in 1 week, 1 day, 1 month, 1 year? Depending on the urgency, you decide whether you need more information or not. Then consider the cost of delay. If you delay this project, how much will it cost? If the cost is minimal, however, the risk is huge. So you do a pro and con analysis to see, if I delay the project just because I need to gather more information, so gathering more information will certainly help me deliver better results. So let's say if I have extra information, I can reduce the risk tolerance by $2 million. But if I delay the project, the cost of delaying the project may be $10 million. So what would I do? I would just go about taking the decision and not getting more information. So that is another way you can talk about how you analyzed and decided whether you should delay or gather more information. Then talk about how did you go about assessing the potential impact of the decision. As I said, like the cost of the decision, which is if you delay, what is the cost, but then what is the impact? If the impact of the decision is very small, which is it only generates, let's say, $10,000 worth of sales, well, you might as well get the better information and then take the decision. Or you can say, that no, the impact is huge, like it can deliver $10 million of sales and this is the window that we need to implement it, then maybe you have to be more urgent and be more quick with the decision, because otherwise you will lose that window and you will lose the opportunity of $10 million. So assess the potential impact. Also talk about how did you gauge the quality of available information. So whatever information is available to you, how much quality does it have? Is it really high quality, high grade information, or is it poor? If it's poor, maybe you need better information. If it's already high quality information that you have, yeah, it's good. Just use that. Talk about how did you apply the 80-20 rule, which is again, which decision, which assumptions, or which information is the most important one, which will make the 80% of the impact, which 20% of the information will make 80% of the impact, and only focus on that. Then talk about how did you identify whether you can adjust later. Talk about, is the decision reversible? If it is, yeah, even with less information, you can make the decision and then reverse it. And then in the end, just trust your intuition, your past experience. How did you make use of your past experience, past precedents, similar situation that has happened before in the company, and how did you make use of that to say, okay, this has happened before, we've tried it, we've tested it, it works. We don't need to reanalyze the information and gather more information. We can just apply it based on the learnings that we have from the past. The next sample question that I have is, tell me about a time when you saw an issue that would impact your team and took a proactive approach to solve it. What was the issue? What did you do? And what was the outcome? What did you learn from the situation? Here again, talk about how did you identify and understood the issue early, which is what was the mechanism that you made use of to identify earlier the issue, or identify the issue or understand it way before it became a big issue. Talk about how did you analyze the root cause. Why is the issue happening? Not just the symptoms. What is it causing? No, but why did it happen in the first place? What is the cause of the issue? Talk about how did you go about setting clear goals and desired outcomes. Again, very important. Always talk about, like, these are the goals that I had to deliver. This is the objective. Will me addressing this situation help deliver the objectives or not? Involving your team. Talk about how did you involve your team in the brainstorming solution. So it's not just you telling them what the problem is. Maybe you just tell them this is the problem, this is what you've identified, and then letting them decide how do they want to solve it. What is the action plan? This way they will own it. So you want them to own the problem, own the situation, and you involve them in this particular in the solution or brainstorming solution for this particular issue. And then you talk about how did you go about developing a step-by-step action plan. So these are the way, or this is the process, we'll deliver it or solve it. This is the action plan. These are the owners for different actions, and hence going about delivering it. Talk about how you implemented this solution incrementally, which is if it is feasible. So you did one part, you saw, okay, if it's feasible, then we do the next part, then we do the next part. So again, making sure that you are taking the right actions, you're going in the right path. Then talk about how did you go about monitoring the progress, because you're taking decisions, small actions. How did you go about monitoring the progress and adjusting where and if needed? And then talk about recognizing and reflecting on any lessons learned. So anything that you learned, what did you learn, and then reflecting it, learning from it, adjusting accordingly based on the learnings that you have. The next sample question that I have is, tell me about a time when you felt your team was not moving to action quickly enough. Again, the idea is bias for action. They're not moving quickly enough. How do you make sure they move quickly enough? What was the situation? What did you do? What was the outcome? Would you have done anything differently? Again, this question and the previous question are for managers. If you are a manager, you have a team, so you see that your team is not moving quickly, what would you do? First of all, you talk about how do you diagnose the underlying cause? Why is it happening? Why are they not moving quickly? What is the issue? So you exactly know these are the things that I need to focus on. Then talk about how do you reiterate the goals and the urgency to the team. Tell them these are the goals that we have to deliver, and if you don't deliver on these tasks, we will be behind our goals. This is urgent. Why is it urgent? So getting a buy-in from the team. So talk about how did you go about getting a buy-in from the team. Talk about how you went about clarifying roles and expectations, like this role has to be done by this particular individual based on their strengths, based on their job descriptions, whatever, but you defined their goals, roles, and then you defined what was expected of them in order for the team to deliver on the goals in an urgent way. you help remove any barriers. So how did you go about removing any barriers, providing them all the resources? Let's say they were missing on a certain technology that they needed. What did you do to provide them access to that technology or the resources that they needed? Then talk about how did you broke the task into manageable steps. So made it very easy for them to understand that this is the task that needs to be done and it's in manageable steps with ownership to each step. You encourage them to make decisions and you encourage them to take ownership. How did you go about motivating them that this is their work, they take ownership and they can take decisions where they want? Also talk about how did you model the behavior and set the pace. Maybe talk about how you took part of the project as well and you delivered on it, just to set an example and tell them how it can be done. And then in the end, talk about how did you continue to provide feedback and continue to energize them, motivate them by providing feedback and motivating them all together. The last question that I have is, tell me about a time when you were able to remove a serious roadblock, barrier preventing your team from making progress. What was the barrier? How were you able to remove it? What was the outcome? Knowing what you know now, would you have done anything differently? Again, this question is also for managers and it's talking about how do you go about removing roadblocks for your team. And again, you have to do it quickly. When there are serious roadblocks, how do you help your team to continue to make progress? So here you talk about, first you understand the nature of the issue. What is the roadblock? Why is it coming? What is the cause of the roadblock? So you can exactly know what is causing the roadblock before you start solving it. Then you talk about how you went about assessing different possible options, like what are the different options, you put them on the table, you did a sensitivity analysis to see which option is better, what is the pros and cons for each of the options, and talk about how you escalated the issue if needed, how you took help from your management and escalated the issue so you can get the needed help. And then talk about how you allocated the necessary resources. Maybe you involve your team and brought them together and say, okay, this is the issue on hand. This is how we will divide and conquer it. Then maybe talk about how did you set up temporary solutions to maintain momentum, right? So even if there wasn't any permanent solution ready on the spot, you still had some makeshift arrangements or makeshift solution in order for you to make sure that the team continues to perform and the momentum continues to be maintained. Talk about how did you communicate updates and keep the team aligned, like telling them what is the progress. Yes, I'm removing the roadblocks. This is how much time I will need. I'm giving you the resources. This is how much time it will need. I've escalated it. It needs more time. So at least the team is aware and they know that something is being done. And in the end, just talk about how did you go about continuing to monitor and the progress and make sure that these roadblocks are not repeated in future. So maybe document it, the process, or creating processes and systems in a way that in future these roadblocks are not repeated. Thank you for watching this video. Hopefully after watching this video, you will be able to ace your Amazon interview. In case you found any value from this video, I'm sure you'll find value from another video on my channel where I talk about how you can go about controlling your nerves in an interview. You can check it out here. Other than that, there is another video where I talk about what are the types of reverse interview questions you should be asking in your Amazon interview. Check it out here. Thank you.